Right? No, this is not just snow. This is history crashing down on an entire state. Cars buried, streets erased, cities frozen in total shutdown. Rhode Island has just been hit by one of the most powerful blizzards ever recorded, breaking records, knocking out power, trapping families inside their homes, and pushing emergency crews to the limit. And it's not over. Another storm is already lining up. What unfolded across Rhode Island was not just another winter storm. It was a moment when an entire state seemed to stop breathing at the same time. Snow did not fall gently. It arrived in waves, thick and relentless, hammering rooftops, streets, cars, and power lines without mercy. Neighborhood after neighborhood vanished beneath a rising white wall. Roads that people used only hours earlier became narrow frozen corridors. Driveways disappeared. Front doors turned into barricades. The sound of plows, engines, and sirens mixed with the constant roar of wind, creating a background of urgency that never faded. In Providence, the storm erased the familiar shape of the city. Streets blurred into one endless field of white. Snow climbed up parked cars until only mirrors and windshields remained visible. Heavy, wet snow clung to trees and power lines, dragging them down under its weight. Branches cracked, poles leaned. Darkness spread block by block as outages rolled through entire neighborhoods. What made this storm so dangerous was not only how much snow fell, but how violently the atmosphere behaved while it was falling. Wind gusts blasted through narrow streets, lifting powder and debris into the air and pushing visibility down to almost nothing. One moment, buildings were faintly visible through the curtain of snow. The next, they vanished completely. Drivers who thought they could move a few blocks found themselves trapped, unable to see more than a few feet ahead. Across the state, the snow totals climbed higher and higher, pushing past records that had stood for generations. At T.F. Green International Airport, official measurements confirmed what residents already knew from their own buried homes and vehicles. This was a historic snowfall, not just heavy, not just severe, historic. The storm became a benchmark event, one that would be spoken about long after the streets were finally cleared. In the coastal communities, conditions deteriorated even faster. In Newport, powerful winds drove snow sideways through narrow streets and along the waterfront. Visibility dropped to near zero. The air filled with sharp, stinging ice particles. Emergency crews struggled to move through deep drifts that formed in minutes. Vehicles were abandoned where they stalled, buried slowly as the storm continued to pile snow on top of them. Blizzard conditions were confirmed as fierce winds combined with dangerously low visibility. This was no longer simply heavy snowfall. This was a full-scale winter emergency. State authorities declared an emergency and imposed strict travel restrictions. Roads were closed. Non-essential movement was banned. Officials warned that anyone attempting to drive could block emergency routes and place both themselves and rescue crews in danger. Even large snowplows became stuck in some areas, swallowed by drifts that rose higher than their blades. The snow itself was not light or fluffy. It was dense and heavy, soaking everything beneath it. Roofs groaned under the load. Flat rooftops filled rapidly, forcing emergency inspections and urgent warnings. In older buildings, the risk of collapse became a serious concern. Residents were urged to clear snow carefully and slowly, knowing that the same snow weighing down their homes could also strain their hearts and bodies. As the storm tightened its grip, the human impact became impossible to ignore. Power outages spread quickly. Entire neighborhoods went dark. Homes lost heat. Families huddled under blankets. Mobile phones became lifelines, their batteries guarded carefully. Warming centers prepared for residents who could no longer remain in freezing homes. Utility crews worked in brutal conditions, fighting wind, snow, and falling debris to restore service, often forced to retreat when conditions became too dangerous to continue. Emergency lines were flooded with calls. Some were from stranded drivers. Others came from residents whose medical equipment had lost power. Others were simply frightened people who had never experienced a storm of this intensity before. Hospitals prepared for a surge of weather-related injuries, slips and falls on hidden ice, carbon monoxide exposure from improper generator use, chest pains from overexertion while shoveling heavy snow. The storm did not only disrupt infrastructure, it tested the physical limits of thousands of people at the same time. In many neighborhoods, something powerful emerged alongside the hardship. Neighbors who had barely spoken before began digging together. People cleared paths to each other's doors. Volunteers checked on elderly residents and those living alone. Food, batteries, and warm drinks were shared between households when stores became unreachable and roads remained blocked. Still, the scale of the storm overwhelmed even the strongest community efforts. Emergency vehicles crawled through narrow corridors carved by plows. Some streets were accessible only by heavy machinery. In multiple areas, snowdrifts piled so high that even front loaders struggled to move through them. Recovery crews were forced to prioritize life-threatening situations first, knowing that many residents would remain without normal services for an extended period. City services were suspended. Public offices closed. Waste collection halted. Schools and public buildings remained shuttered. The entire rhythm of daily life collapsed into a single goal: survive the storm and its immediate aftermath. Officials warned residents repeatedly to clear exterior furnace vents and exhaust pipes. Snow drifts had buried them in many locations, creating a silent but deadly risk inside homes. The danger did not always come from the cold itself. It came from the invisible buildup of gases, from blocked airflow, and from improvised heating solutions used in desperation. As the storm slowly began to weaken, its destruction became fully visible. Cars were crushed beneath fallen trees. Storefronts were hidden behind towering snowbanks. Sidewalks vanished completely. Intersections became massive mounds of snow, forcing pedestrians to climb over frozen walls just to cross the street. In some areas, it was impossible to tell where roads ended and private property began. Officials confirmed that this storm had surpassed the most severe snow events in modern state history. Long-standing records were broken. The scale of accumulation redefined what extreme winter weather looks like for this region. But the storm's impact did not end when the snow slowed. The aftermath became its own battle. Restoring power would take days. Clearing roads would take far longer. Inspecting buildings, repairing damaged infrastructure, and reopening public services would stretch resources across the state. Emergency managers warned that progress would be slow and uneven, especially in coastal and hard-to-reach communities. Behind every statistic stood real people. Families digging out vehicles so they could reach work or medical appointments. Parents struggling to keep children warm and calm in darkened homes. Business owners watching frozen storefronts and damaged signs disappear beneath thick ice. Workers reporting for emergency duty despite knowing their own homes were still buried. This storm changed daily life in a single night. And for many residents, the emotional weight of the event was just as heavy as the snow itself. Fear, exhaustion, frustration, gratitude, relief. All of it mixed together in the cold air as communities slowly began to move again. Officials continue to urge extreme caution during cleanup operations. Heavy snow remains unstable on rooftops and trees. Roads hide black ice beneath fresh layers of snow. Overexertion during shoveling remains one of the most dangerous risks following a storm of this magnitude. This was not an ordinary winter system. This was a historic winter disaster. A storm that reshaped streets, tested emergency systems, and pushed communities to their limits. A storm that will be remembered not only for how much snow it dropped, but for how deeply it disrupted life across the state. From buried neighborhoods to darkened homes, from frozen highways to overwhelmed emergency lines, the blizzard has left a lasting mark on Rhode Island. And as recovery continues, one truth remains clear. The snow will eventually melt. The streets will reopen. The lights will come back on. But this storm has already secured its place in history as one of the most powerful and disruptive winter events the state has ever faced.